So what I'm hearing from you is niching is the right thing to do, but you also have to do it the right way. And this is something that we're really going to get into today. Welcome to the Locker Room Talk podcast. My name is Riley Beatty, a small business owner and host of this podcast. I'm joined by my co-host and your corporate executive insider, Stacy Miller. Together, we bring you the business resources and knowledge that have traditionally been held secret in the locker room of the good old boys club. Every single week, we invite you to break down the locker room door with us to chat about the development, marketing, sales, and operational knowledge you need to grow and scale your small business. Stacy, tell us what the game plan is for today.
Today, we're going to be talking about niching, which may come to you as a surprise. It actually rests within the development pillar of your company. And when folks get started, especially building a small business, they often think niching is part of your marketing strategy, but niching comes back to your product market fit, which we're going to talk about today.
I am also so excited because this was a big mistake that I made. And when I talk with fellow business owners, this is a mistake that I commonly see them making as well. But before we jump into development, niching, and product market fit, we're going to do our small talk first with our question of the day. And today, Stacy, you have to tell me a little bit about the first year of your career.
Oh my gosh. It's so fun to look back on first year of career versus where we're both at now. For me, it was my first year out of college. And I actually took a job at a small privately owned high-end health club as their frontline manager. So I was managing their front desk, their cafe, their lifeguarding program. So different than what I do now. But what was so fun about that career was I got to work in a business environment that still had a lot of young people that I could relate to. I also got to learn a bunch of basics about business, but also about customer service and how to interact with people. The people at this gym really expected a certain caliber of interaction. And so that was invaluable in my career. What about you, Riley?
I think it is so interesting that I ended up being a dietitian because I actually originally wanted to go to medical school. And I don't know if we've talked about this, but I took the MCAT, I applied, I had interviews, I was ready to go. And it was so interesting because I've always loved food. And one of my bachelors was nutrition because I have a dual bachelor's. And I did it just because there was a lot of crossover in the sciences. And I took a gap year between finishing undergrad and then preparing for grad school or medical school at the time. And through that time being out of school, I just had so many different life experiences that really pushed me towards like going the dietetics route. But I do think it's super interesting because even if I had decided to go to medical school, I probably would still be in the same position, but I just would have had a different focus in my practice.
That's fascinating. I did not know that you almost went to medical school. I could totally see that for you, though. Like, I think you would have crushed it. But I'm also glad that you are where you are.
I always joke with like Jenna and my team at Steady State that I want to go back and like become a PA. And everyone's like, no, you do not need any more hobbies or degrees or anything. So I do think I feel like everything happens for the right reasons.
Totally. I know. And isn't that so true? I've always thought about going back for like an MBA or something like that. And it's just kind of, if you love school, it feels like a no-brainer. And if you don't love school, you don't need to go. You can learn those things outside of school too. Maybe not for medical, but for MBA.
I'm always tempted to go back to learn about a lot of like the business skills and the things that we've done together and the things that we have talked about. And I'm really excited about this podcast because it can really help give access to resources and like education and knowledge that people would learn in traditional degrees, but don't always have the option to go back and get.
I couldn't agree more. And even though I don't have my MBA and I started obviously far away from the career that I'm in now, I've always appreciated that people say like when you've worked in corporate, it kind of doubles as an experiential MBA in some ways, not to discredit anybody who has an MBA out there, but you learn a lot of the frameworks and systems thinking and skills that show up in an MBA. And I'm also very excited to share those here.
Well, let's jump into our first topic. We'll talk about development and niching today. Today, we're going to be talking about niching. And I'm super excited to talk about this topic because as a small business owner, anytime that I looked online for ways to increase my business, increase revenue, and to get more clients, everybody was talking about niching. I'm not sure if you're seeing this in a corporate space as well.
It's interesting because niching shows up in a corporate space a little bit differently. It's more what we refer to as a product specialization. And when you have a product up front, you're trying to solve a specific problem, and then you either create multiple products or multiple offshoots of a product to solve different problems that are tangential to that first problem. But it's essentially the same thing as niching.
Okay, well, I'm super excited to get into it from a small business perspective and then also from a corporate perspective. And I thought, in case anybody hasn't heard of niching before, I could start off by defining it. And I just used Gemini, so I just Googled, and the first thing that came up was this lovely definition. As Google says, niching is a business strategy of specializing by focusing on a specific narrow market segment rather than a broad audience. Totally makes sense. It involves identifying a specialized customer group, problem, or industry to target, allowing for higher expertise, less competition, and tailored marketing. It enables higher profitability and brand recognition. Basically, it's a fancy way to say that you're a specialist, and you just described this as well from a corporate environment. When you hear niching, though, from the outside or as a business consultant, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think when I've consulted with smaller businesses or even startups, it's really about narrowing in on what's going to make you successful and not trying to, as they say, boil the ocean, like take on so much that your product loses its specialization or its targetedness for its audience. One of the things that we say often in the startup world when I've consulted with startups is startups don't die from starvation, they die from indigestion. It's a really famous quote. I've got to remember the author at some point, but it's basically you don't want to take on so many things that all of them die. You need to focus and have like ruthless prioritization on the one specialization.
I'm laughing right now because I feel like I do this. And when we have conversed in the past, you've been like, okay, girlfriend, like, calm
Focus
down,
in.
focus. Because it's so easy to, I don't know, get carried away because a lot of us in the small business space, like, we have big visions, we have products that we want to deliver, and it can be so exciting working in a small business. And sometimes, like, I don't know if, like, you could say, like, our eyes are bigger than our stomach, but our visions are sometimes bigger than what we need to focus on in the moment.
Totally. And it's not a bad thing. It can be really fun to chase one of those threads and realize, oh my gosh, I started here, but I actually think this is a better option for my audience or for my business. And you've done that really successfully with the period recovery program. However, you have to balance that with like finishing the thing you started so you can truly see what is warranting success.
So what I'm hearing from you is niching is the right thing to do, but you also have to do it the right way. And this is
Totally.
something that we're really going to get into today.
Yes.
Something that we talk a lot about in the period recovery program, and obviously because I'm a sports dietitian, I'm always going to pull in examples from the work that I do, but we talk about knowledge versus implementation. And like I mentioned, when you Google how to start a business or how to be successful in a business, niching comes up. And we all understand the importance of niching and we've all heard about it, but I do think implementation of niching can be really challenging. At least for me, when I first started, the idea of like narrowing down my market and the population that I was targeting is really scary because when you're a new business owner, like you need capital. And the idea of becoming more specialized or focusing on a smaller group of people in our brain triggers as like less people, smaller market, less clients, less capital, like not going to survive.
I've seen this happen so many times. The way I like to position it is when you think of this as a pie instead of ambiguous market space. When you think of your overall market that you're targeting as a pie, if you're targeting everyone, let's take PRP, period recovery program, as an example. If you're targeting all women, there's a huge swath of women that might not need that program and that support. And so when you think of the piece of the pie that your business is actually winning market share from, it's really small. It might be a single digit percentage. When you instead niche and you start to think about if I take my pie and I redefine what my pie is, and I just define it as women who haven't had their period in 3 months or haven't, whatever parameters you say, then when you think about the market share of that pie you're winning, it might be over 50%, over 80%. And when you can start to measure in a percentage of your market, it helps you understand how successful you are in that niche. And then you can say, okay, can I expand this niche further? And you get to widen that pie a little bit. So starting out with that really big pie can be really overwhelming and it can feel like you're failing. Whereas shrinking down that pie you're looking at and really aiming at winning a certain percentage of it really helps you kind of make the problem more realistic to tackle.
Yes, I love that you gave that example. Another example that I used when I've helped other dietitians like start up their companies and their businesses is the idea of a plumber. So I'm not handy. If my shower breaks, I'm Googling plumber who can fix my shower. I'm not Googling plumber. I don't even know if a plumber is the right person to fix my shower, but I'm looking for a shower specialist. And if I come across somebody's website and they're the shower specialist of North Carolina, I feel much more confident going with that individual versus going with Joe the plumber. Joe the plumber might do a great job, but if I want a problem solved, I want a specialist doing the work there.
Absolutely. And this is why we feed so well off of each other, because I can take that big corporate concept, but you can talk about it in practicality of like, how does this actually work? How does a niche show up?
And they go hand in hand. Let's talk a little bit more about niching and doing it the right way, because oftentimes we're so focused on the niche. I feel like we've lost sight of what's actually going on in our business. It's all about niching, niching, niching. So let's talk a little bit about first steps if somebody is interested in niching to grow their business.
The easiest way that I think about niching is actually in this concept called product market fit. And we'll talk about this a lot within the locker room and locker room talk. So I'm not going to cover everything about it here today, but essentially you're just breaking down this phrase, product market fit, to understand how to niche. In corporate America, companies will spend months, years developing what's called a product market fit. When you break it down, the market is just where you're selling your product, kind of what we've been talking about already. What's that pie and how do you define it? So, who are you selling your product to? Why that type of persona? Is it a specific age, maybe a specific gender in some cases, a specific geography, demographic? Basically, you're trying to say who would want to buy this thing. And then you also need to define what is that thing. That's your product. A product is not just a physical thing. I think in the consumer world, we think about products as things you go to the store and buy. But a product can be the general thing you're trying to sell. And often for small businesses, that's actually what would be considered a service. It might be somebody trying to help somebody learn how to garden, somebody helping somebody with period recovery. Anything under the sun, you're kind of selling your expertise, and that's what's considered a service. Still in this product market fit concept, we're referring to that under the umbrella of the word product. So when you think about product market fit, you're trying to think about what is your product and define that. What is the market of the person who wants to buy that, in your opinion, and really define that person and that business that wants to buy that. And that will give you that fit, the part of the equation of like, how do those two things fit together? That's your pie that you're trying to win over, or in corporate speak, the market share that you want to win.
Product market fit is so important because I remember when I was first starting out and I was hearing, advice from business coaches, they were focusing on either the product or the market, not them together. I remember, getting advice on, again, niche, niche, niche. But when we look at niching, you have to look at the product or the service that you're selling and make sure that it matches to the market.
Totally. And I think what's really interesting is often small business owners will consult small business owners and corporate folks will consult corporate folks. And you don't get this like crossover of these concepts. And so essentially people are creating a floor or a ceiling in those type of relationships. Corporate people have this floor where if something's too simple or too rudimentary, too nascent, they don't want to work on it until it's at a certain caliber. And small business folks think, here's the ceiling. Maybe the ceilings make 50K, maybe the ceilings make 100K, but it's still a ceiling. And I think what's cool is like when you start to combine these concepts across these market areas, you get rid of that floor and get rid of that ceiling. And we can just talk about generally business growth.
And that's exactly what we're doing with the locker room.
Exactly.
We're so excited. And we're so excited that you are here and listening, because that's what we're trying to do with this podcast and with this community is make all of the resources available to women entrepreneurs who have not had access before. So you're either in that corporate space or you're in that small business space. And now we're trying to combine them, similar to what you're trying to do with your product and your market. We're trying to combine them.
That's right.
I want to give a quick example because I'm such a example-based person, or I could say a visual person. And one of my experiences in the past can help a lot of others when it comes to product market fit. I, once upon a time, was a soccer player, and I've always had a soft spot for soccer players. And when I was working with a business coach at the very beginning of my business journey, I was really pushed to niche towards a pro female soccer player space. And I started to get a lot of traction. I grew on social. I was getting a lot of interest for discovery calls, but I wasn't signing clients. And what was happening, and I didn't realize it at the time, I thought, my pricing is too expensive, or I must not be worth it, or I'm not enough. What was actually happening was the service that I was offering to these soccer players was not matching the market. They were interested in nutrition coaching and nutrition counseling, but the one-on-one coaching program that I was selling to them or offering as a service was too expensive for them. And as a dietitian, I was charging the right amount per market. But what was happening was my population and my niche wasn't aligned with the service that I was offering. There was a mismatch there. And this was a really big struggle for me, and something that I didn't figure out for a couple of months, but really hurt me like mindset wise and then also business growth wise.
It's so interesting that you bring this up because I think product market fit, figuring out your product market fit, especially in the beginning of building your business, it can really be a bit of like a shot in the dark. And you try something and it doesn't work. That doesn't mean you're not on the right track. It just means that you need to iterate on your product market fit definitions and how you go to market. In this case, you brought up pricing, and we'll talk about pricing a lot more in other episodes, but basically your price also needs to match your value. And so even if these players really thought that this was going to be helpful for them, maybe it wasn't the right program model or the exact product market fit that matched your price. And so it's almost another layer of product market fit is this relationship between price and value.
Well, we love to talk about money. And I think as women, we're not talking about money. We're afraid to talk about money.
Yes.
And this is something that you've helped me with a lot. We're like, I'm no longer afraid to talk about money.
I love that. I think it's so important for women to talk about money. Financial literacy is a huge, huge win for women all over the world. And that's financial literacy in your personal life, but also, of course, in your business. If you're starting a small business, if you're running a business, you've got to understand your finances. And these things are not really taught in school unless you get something like an MBA or you get experiential knowledge.
Yes. And there's such a scarcity mindset when it comes to women entrepreneurs that we're afraid to talk about money with others in the space. There's this unnecessary competition, or I guess scarcity mindset. This is also why it's so hard for entrepreneurs to niche down, because they don't think that there's enough available market space for their offer or service.
Totally. And I have to say up front, and I'll say this over and over again, there is more than enough space for everyone if we all specialize, if we all niche. There's so many people that need so many things, and we're all specialized in so many things. That's what makes an economy like ours run, is these specializations. So when you're too generalized, it's not really going to hit in the same way. Also with money, like learning about how to navigate money in your business is so critical for your long-term success. Understanding things like pricing models, financial models, just keeping your bookkeeping, basic things, and you can always outsource those things, but it's really, really important. I'll also say what's been interesting for me as a consultant is I've worked with so many businesses that almost breathe a sigh of relief when I can give anonymous examples of other people's pricing models that I've helped them build. Because like you said, nobody wants to talk to each other directly about money. And I think we should. I think we should break down that barrier.
And this is something that we're going to talk about in our weekly newsletter. Every single week, you will be getting a free newsletter that's going to help expand on a lot of the topics that we talk about here. This week, we're going to be continuing the conversation about product market fit, niching, and then also a little bit about pricing. Stacey, before we head out, what are your top 2 to 3 tips for those listening who might be interested in niching and working on their product market fit?
Such a good question. I think first off is to sit and have that critical thinking moment with yourself. And I would say do this on pen and paper first, AI second. I am such a big fan of AI, and we're probably going to talk about AI a lot here too. But it's always good to start with just you and your business on paper. So write down in bullets, in Scratch, whatever you need, like what do you think your product is, product or service? And then write down what you think your niche is. And I listed off some of those questions: type of person, a geography, a demographic. Write down what you think. Then take all of that, put it into an AI tool and ask AI to kick back what AI thinks that looks like, and keep building from there. Like iterate on this, really try to invest time into defining it. So I would say start there. Define your niche by defining your product and your market. Then we can talk about pricing.
I love the example of starting off on paper and then putting it into AI. I always like to challenge people to, build out their niche or build out their product or maybe their ideal client profile on paper first and putting it into AI and seeing what it spits out. Because sometimes we feel like we are crystal clear about our niche and then we talk about it with somebody else or we put it into AI and something completely different gets spit out. So I think this is a really good practice for people.
Totally.
I know we just covered a lot of ground regarding product market fit, market research, and you might be sitting there a little overwhelmed. That is exactly why we created the game plan. Every Tuesday, we take these big high-level business strategies like the product market fit framework we discussed today and break it down into quick game plans for you to implement in your business. Think of this as like your weekly business audit from your coach. You're going to get actionable tools that you need to make sure your product or offer is actually what the world is asking for. Hi, everyone. It's Riley again. You're going to see me at the end of every single episode recapping and reflecting with you based off of what we talked about in this recording. I personally go in and edit every single episode, and after I'm going to pop on here to chat with you about it. As a fellow business owner and entrepreneur, I understand how overwhelming and frustrating this journey can be. Every time I talk with Stacy, either on one of our episodes or offline, I learn so much. She's such a valuable resource, and I want to make sure that you're taking away the same main points that I am. In this episode, we discussed a lot about the concept of niching. If you have ever Googled marketing or marketing improvement for a small business, the concept of niching has popped up. Niching is just one way to think about the idea of product market fit. Product market fit itself is pretty self-explanatory, right? You have a product, a service, or an offer, and you have a population or a group that wants to purchase it. That's your market, and you want to make sure that it's a good fit. There's a lot of discourse online about the concept of niching, and again, this is just another way to frame product market fit. In this episode, I share an example about mistakes that I made when it came to niching or building out a product market fit in the beginning, and how oftentimes people are just focused on either the product or the market, not necessarily how it all ties together. We're going to further get into this in our free newsletter, The Game Plan. The Game Plan comes out every single week, and it does coincide with our weekly podcast episodes. This episode itself is one of our 3 that is being released as part of our launch series. Our first episode introduces Stacy and myself, talks about our highs and lows when it comes to our career. This episode is obviously about niching and product market fit, and we really get into product market fit and further the conversation in episode 3.